So, good evening. I'm Ken Wright. I'm assistant professor here in the Cultural Heritage Graduate Program at the School of Architecture, and it's my truly great privilege to be able to introduce Ray Kappe this evening, F-A-I-A, a man whose architectural and educational career, as many of you know, began in LA in 1953, that's 60 years ago. Ray graduated from the School of Architecture at the University of Berkeley in 1951, then went to work for the San Francisco firm of Action Allen, working on designs for the storied Eichler houses, which really, I think, established the trajectory of his career in terms of modular, very high-quality wood construction. Following that, he came to LA. He worked with Carol Maston for a period, and then set out on his own with a variety of different firms focusing primarily on single-family residences. One of which, of course, as I think you all know, is his wife Shelley's own home in Pacific Palisades. Certainly one of the most important, if not maybe for me, the most important post-war era house in Southern California. This was completed in 1968. It's now a Los Angeles Cultural Heritage landmark. He's been published extensively. I won't go into those details in many architectural journals and magazines, especially GA Houses, and is the subject of a number of books. Ray Kappe Houses Themes Variations in 1998, and then Ray Kappe 1953 to 2003, published by the Architecture and Design Museum in conjunction with the celebration, actually, of 50 years in architecture and architectural education. He's received numerous awards, the Schindler and Neutra International Medal for Design Excellence, the California Council AIA Bernard Maybeck Award for Design, for his lifelong achievements in architectural design and education, and the Topaz Medal, which is the highest award in architectural education. Perhaps, I don't know if it's most importantly, but certainly in addition to his architectural career, he was the founding chair of 2 schools of architecture. Not many people can say that. 1968, he founded and organized the Department of Architecture at California Polytechnic State University at Pomona, and then most well-known in 72, he initiated the architectural program at SCIARC, which he headed until 1987. And actually served on the board, was chairman and board member until 2007. We have Ray with us tonight. We also have his wife Shelley, who stood with him shoulder to shoulder, I think, through many of those adventures. That's SCIARC in particular, and it's especially sort of touching for me in that I came to SCIARC just the year that Ray and Shelley left, and spent many hours teaching architectural history using Shelley's and Ray's slides. So I feel kind of special kinship there. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce and welcome Ray Kappe.
My voice doesn't carry like Ken's does, so I'm hoping this mic will work. Let's see, I think it doesn't.
He needs some help with the lights, too.
Okay, is this better? You can hear me now? Okay. Thank you, Ken, for that very thorough introduction. Usually I get introduced by people who get little pieces and parts, but Ken had it almost all the way, and I appreciate that. It's nice to be back at USC. 45 years ago, I think I taught here for the first time, and it was actually the first time that I did any teaching. And I learned a lot in that that period like most people who teach do, and I always followed what was going on at USC. I have many friends from USC, some of them here tonight. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. People from SciArc are here. I appreciate that too. And those of you from USC, it's nice to have you here tonight. I'm going to start out tonight with a film. It's about 15 to 18 minutes, and then pick up from there, going over kind of my career for the 60 years. For many of you, I think, who are, some of you I think of going into your own practices when you get out of the school here. Some of you plan to go to work for bigger firms, I'm sure. Mine has always been a small practice, and it was more typical, as Ken was saying, of what was going on here in Los Angeles. Most architects really started doing houses. There were only a few big firms at that time, and really LA was always known for its house architects, and much less for public work and so forth, because there wasn't as much as there is today. And it wasn't global as it is today. It's changed greatly, and this afternoon I was in one of those global firms, Gensler's downtown, visiting a SciArc grad who now is a principal at that firm, and it's amazing to see a firm of that scale and what they do and what goes on. And there are bigger firms than Gensler, but not too many. And so it's quite a different process, and I'll be showing you more of what a kind of a small practitioner does over a period of 60 years. So I'm going to start with the film, and then I'll get back on after.
I met Ray, and I was 21, 22 years old when I was a fourth-year student at USC, and he was teaching, and he was filling in for someone's post or something. 4 years later, I'm teaching in Pomona. Ray is the chairman of the department, and Ray at that time more or less ran LA, the architectural scene. He was the leader of that group. And so the group was all get fired, including Ray, the chairman. And he just came up with an idea, let's just start our own school, which is completely crazy idea. Right? And we were literally meeting over the house, so put together a program, and we took the senior class, 44 people came, giving up an accredited degree, and very quickly the school started becoming known as this kind of controlled anarchy, the kind of place of continual experiment. All really interesting acts started with design. They start with a belief and an optimism. And I look back, and it was Ray that had the idea, he had the ambition, he had the desire, and was equipped, basically, in a leadership role that none of us were equipped to do at the time. Ray produced a series of absolutely magnificent pieces of work, starting with his own house, which is really a masterpiece.
At the time that I had finished the house, I felt that I had finally come to a place that felt the most comfortable that I had ever been architecturally. Rudolph obviously was an influence. The economy was an influence in this house. People see it many, many ways. Something's Schindler-esque, something's Wright, and something has some very aspects. But it has a lot of similarity, I think, to the kind of thing that Rudolph did. I think we both have somewhat similar sensibilities in terms of developing levels and kind of floating pieces and that kind of a feeling.
It represents a his on-campus work is a complete, total piece of work in every sense. And it's something that he produced at a time in his life, I think he'd probably be in his close to 40, plus or minus, somewhere in that area, where he looked at everything. There's nothing that was untouched. And it was a time, again, an era where people were building. And then he was a person that drew, he's a person that built his ideas, and you can see it in the house. Everything's accounted for.
Actually, I purchased the site in the early 60s, about 63. And I was aware that it was on the springs. And there was a great amount of water flow. And at the time, I was very much involved with developing a modular idea in which I used core units that were connected with laminated beams. So I decided that it would probably work here because I could touch down with a series of concrete tower units. That created a house of 4,000 square feet, held 600 square feet of land. I wanted to keep the house parallel to the street because that's the way the neighborhood is developed. And my lot was a transition lot between a flat level above and a flat level below, and the land was actually coming 45 degrees to the house. So I ended up with a large number of levels, about 7 levels in the house. If we take it apart, we can see the section. You can see the studio where we're standing now, lower living room, dining room, kitchen, upper living room. Plan-wise, the whole thing was rather simple. I thought of it as really this whole area through here to be a family space. And that was from the kitchen to the studio. And in this case, I have eye contact on the highest point in the house, the lowest point. There were 6 towers that held up the house. We can see one over there that contains a stairway. 3 of them contain bathrooms. And the kitchen, I use it as a nook area, and the master bedroom is a fireplace. So each of these had their purpose as well as support. And they were 8 by 12 dimensions that could accommodate most activities of bathrooms, stairways, kitchens, and so forth. The rest of the house bridges between these concrete columns. All the tower units are skylit, as we see here. At the same time, because I have a clear story between those 2 rooms, I get the light in the kitchen space as well as into the bathroom. And so there's always that usual. And there's usually a line, as you look around here, you'll see, well, here in particular, this line is carried through as the lower level to establish the point of door heights. And above that, there's always glass, and that glass then frees the upper roof. Same way when I dealt with the glass and the wiring at each corner, rather than have a mullion, I got rid of that so that there was no sense that there was a support point there for the beam. It gives you more of that floating feeling. We were also able to get that kind of a float from living room to living room. I didn't want handrails on the stairway because it was always easier for us to manage the groceries by putting one child in each stair landing and just lift the grocery right straight up through the middle without needing handrails. And also I think it makes people more aware of what they're seeing and what they're looking at. The laminated beams are under the spur. Everything else is redwood. Redwood victims in 20-foot lengths maximum. So from beam to beam is 20 feet here. So the one lines that are inside of that then carry the trellis members from that beam out to the 12-foot extension. So as we go out here, you can see what I was describing. trellis, which extends 12 feet beyond the beam, is carried by those one lines. At the same time, trellises always create kind of wonderful patterns on the outside deck. And from this point, actually, we moved across this bridge up the stairs and up to the pool area. I try to swim in the pool every day if I can. So one of the interesting features that came out of the development of the pool area was that this other piece of land was the same elevation as the roof. And so I was able to then give an extension to the roof, which made the whole yard feel much larger, because when you look out into the distance from the upper deck, you almost have endless trees and you feel like you're really in a forest somewhere, not on a typical street lot. This is the tower that's in the kitchen, where the eating area is. The fact that the dining room is down several steps from the kitchen, you're not aware of the kitchen itself when you are in the dining room. It feels like an enclosed dining room, but it isn't. So it's still informal, but also has a degree of formality to it. And I think that's kind of what the house does in general.
Living in it has just been a joy. It's hard to believe it's been 40 years. Every day it's something new. New details, new light, new shadow, something else to experience. It's been wonderful.
At 13, I came to Los Angeles and went to junior high that Neutra had designed. Emerson Junior High, which had one classroom in the building, which I was always fascinated by, where the whole glass sliding door opened up and the classroom could move out into the outdoor space. I always thought it was more important to have as much class as possible so that we could have this interaction with the outdoors. California, I think, is the best climate for that. And it works well here. I went to Berkeley, and so I went to work full-time in San Francisco for Schindler and Neutra. At that time, we were just beginning to do Acclaimed homes. And the Acclaimed homes were a series of tract houses by a developer named Eichler, who had lived in a Frank Lloyd Wright house and felt that was such a wonderful experience. He wanted to share this with more people in the population, so he decided he would be building these very small, rather inexpensive, post-beam modern houses, and they were very, very successful. I then got a job with Carl Maston, who had a small office. Spent 2 years working there to finish my apprenticeship period. Carl Maston's attitude towards architecture was very much the same as my own. You know, how to create architecture that developed a better lifestyle for people. Carl at that time had located a couple pieces of land, and he asked me if I was interested in developing an apartment building next door. That was my first project on my own. I guess I was 26, and it was 1953.
I spent about a year looking into the real estate market to create a business kind of related homes, and I learned that buildings have an unbelievably large and disproportionate impact on the environment. So about a third of the greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S. are to heat, cool, and light buildings. 65% of the electricity, heat, cool, light buildings. 40% of raw materials in the world are used to create buildings. So when I thought about building, I said it has to be built in a responsible reusable way. Well, how do you do that responsibly? Well, first you got to get great architects. So we talked about Ray. Ray has always been one of my favorite architects. He's a rare modernist who really integrates a craftsman-like attention to detail and more. As I started to talk to him, I discovered that in fact he'd been doing prefabricated architecture for decades. He'd actually worked on some designs for modular buildings. And he's been doing energy efficient design for decades. So over there's some of the same Legos I've had as a kid. I played with these and still do. And actually this very much inspired my thinking about prefabrication, because Legos are a bunch of pre-created pieces, modules that you can combine to do different things. And you know, what we're trying to do with the homes is componentize, segmentize, create a consistent attachment system. So they're absolutely analogies. They aren't total analogies. Legos are pretty lightweight, these weigh 50,000 pounds, and you know, those snap together, these require welding. So you know, something. We don't do those colors, but yeah, we have others. So it's a difference between prefab and a site-built home. Site-built, you're going to do the foundation, then you're going to frame it, then you're going to put up the walls and do the electrical and plumbing and finish it out. Prefab, you're working on the foundation, and somewhere off-site, you're working on the house components. When you have the foundation, you can hopefully come to site and finish things out much quicker.
I think most people think of a module as a box. When you open up a piece of the module, it takes away from the sense that you're in a box. And so when you're in this house, which was one of my greatest desires, was to make it a different kind of experience, or an experience that one might get from a custom house, rather than the feeling of being a series of closed elements. We used a see-through fireplace so that the room above, which was meant to be more of a cozy sitting area, and the dining room, both could partake of the fireplace. It also gave the space a continuous flow. And at this point, we're in the middle of the house, it just allows the whole space to really come alive. You get kind of the whole feeling that the house is really alive. For me, the processional through space is really important. So I usually bring people in kind of low, and then as we move up into the naked space, it becomes just that much more dramatic. And this is actually a Frank Lloyd Wright attitude as well, that there was this big change in volume from low to high.
A clear requirement was this ability for the home to adapt to people's changing lifestyle needs in certain ways. So we came up with a few things here that sort of important. One is movable walls. So all the bedrooms have these walls that open and close. There's a sliding system. There's also this accordion system. We're integrating into our homes this ability to add internal and external space. So if you wanted to create a private fourth bedroom, you could put a floor plate and two wall plates and expand this. We like this notion of homes that are adaptable. We were very focused on making this a LEED certified home, and in fact we wanted to be the first to platform. But LEED stands for Leadership in Environmental and Energy Design. It started by the USC in 2000. And it has become the national green building certification program. It's the biggest, it's the most well-known. but we don't use lean actually as our internal guide for what we're doing. We developed our own set of goals. We call them Z6. We're trying to make our homes as much as possible zero energy, zero water, zero emissions, zero carbon, zero waste, and zero ignorance. So when we say zero energy, two parts to that problem. One, minimize energy demand, so make things as energy efficient as possible. And then two, supply what we need from renewable resources. So, number one, reducing demand. Very tight on the harder to do here because we do have monoglass. The glass we use is double pane and low needs. It's pretty energy efficient for glass. We use polycal, which is polycarbonate, which has twice the thermal properties of double pane glass. So it's much more efficient as an insulator.
There's really a plastic material of several layers. It's a layer of plastic, air, and that's why it becomes a more efficient piece of material. When the building grows very strong, it's almost like a hard piece.
We use very high R factor, which is a level of insulation in the walls. And by the way, it's denims, blue jeans. All of the downlights are LEDs. LEDs use a tenth of the power of incandescent. Super energy and water efficient Bosch appliances. Cork floors. Cork is a very fast growing material. You don't have to fell the tree to harvest it. Very energy efficient radiant heating system, so it's hot water under the concrete and then the floor above, and that's preheated by solar tubes on the roof. That reduces demand, and then we have photovoltaics on the roof. Produces probably 80 to 85% of electricity here.
So when Steve was talking about the energy issues, for me, that usually means how it controls the sun, as well as what you use in terms of active systems like photovoltaics. And so the trial statement is a way to cut your sun from your house during the summertime.
Zero water. Reduce demand, which is good for everybody, and then reclaim what you need, at least for irrigation. All of the water fixtures have low flow, high aeration, all the toilets are dual flush. All of the landscape is drought tolerant, native landscape. So that's reducing demand. Then we have a gray water system. So dishwasher, washing machine, showers, sinks, that water is used for irrigation. We've got a 2,500 gallon cistern in a study, so the first 5 feet of stormwater is diverted to that. So we use that for irrigation. Zero emissions, minimize off-gassing. So nowhere to know that free. We've got special fans in the garage that take out carbon monoxide that can seep into the house. The fireplace burns the age of alcohol, so it creates no smoke. Zero, it just creates water vapor. Zero carbon, minimize carbon footprint. So we care about how materials are made, how they're transported, how they're constructed, and even how they're deconstructed once a home is served in season light. Zero waste, sort of the same idea. How much waste is involved in creating, producing, transporting material. All the energy materials are recycled or reclaimed. Steel is the most recycled building material there is. Cedar, and the cedar outside is what's called FSC certified forest stewardship tax. The concrete here is mixed with fly ash, so it's a more recycled building material. I, of course, drive the Prius, and the Prius has a great system that shows you in real time what your gas mileage is. And any Prius owner will tell you it becomes at the beginning, you just want to get as much as possible, because any system of feedback can be improved. So we worked with this company to develop a system like that for homes. It shows you in real time how much electricity, water, gas you're using to inspire you and build you don't care, to be more responsible about your resource use in that home.
Steve Glenn's house was the first living home house. This house, the White House, was actually the second one constructed. So here we have again the continuous space. to the living room, and to the media room. The media room, though, can be closed off again and sliding it on very simply outside doors. The other thing that I've tried to do, like I do in each of the houses, is try to get some vertical space. So here we really have to use more of the stairwell, and the idea that the dining room open to that space as well, which again gives it a little more fun. I established an 8-foot data line for open doors and fixed glass throughout the whole house. So once again, you get the clear story between that data horizontal and the ceiling or flooring, the ceiling roof. And at this point in time, we tried to standardize the modules more than we had in the first one. This is made out of only one type of module, and they're 12 feet wide, 12 feet high, but varying lengths. This would be one module wide, 2, 3, 4 modules wide. When modules are delivered, they're craned up into this base. They try to bring this module, the exam module, as tight together as they can. If you just look at this floor in a very simple way, what's demonstrated comes closer to the ideas of the case study period in the early 50s, where the goal of some at least peer going was to get a high repetitive steel system that would work. And this demonstrates a similar character and quality, but using modules instead of parts. What we're trying to do is to get these so complete that once the 2-day installation takes place, there's very little time that's spent in the neighborhood disturbing the people around with construction, trucks, and all this kind of thing.
The first one we did took 12 months. So permit, I moved in about a year later. Install took 8.5 hours, and it probably took 3 months or so to finish it after install. The wired home took about 6 months from permit to mostly complete. So that's faster. I think most people who want homes want one homes. I think most people who want modern homes want one homes. And I think many people who think of modern homes think that they're not one. Ray is just one of the best that's ever been at creating more modern spaces.
See if this works right now. I cut her off too soon. Help. Wait, I see what happened.
Than you.
I get the PowerPoint thing, so
If we get rid of
just let that go, that should run out. Well, you know, I start over again. You said hit the...
Oh, is this, is the film or the PowerPoint?
There you go. Well, now let's start with one. Okay.
And then probably close to the mic.
Yeah, I will. Well, this has been sort of a double introduction, but I thought seeing the film, there was sort of a double lecture there, one on sustainability and one on some of my thinking process, at least, in my own house, and a way to kind of look at architecture in which not only what we do as architects is important, but what was stressed several times there was the fact that we get the amount of reflection that's always an interesting illusion, the amount of shadow and play, the love of nature. All these aspects are very important, and I've always thought that the layer beyond the walls, which is usually made up of trees in my case, has always been a very important factor in development of architecture. And sometimes we work very hard, or some people do at least, to get sort of odd shapes and odd things and strange things to happen. And I always feel that it's much nicer when it happens through more of a natural process. So how did I get from the beginning to the end? This is 60 years, and I'm going to have to take you through quite a few slides here. I hope you can stay with me through most of the evening. One of the things I wanted to correct, Tom Main said we were fired from Cal Poly. That wasn't true. We actually all resigned. And in reality, the faculty union took up my case because they thought it was unwarranted, and won that case, and I could have been reinstated as the chair again. But by that time, we had such a nice cause célèbre, and all the students were interested in starting this new school, and so were we, and so we all just decided we weren't going to go back. And it wasn't just a senior class. Actually, it was first, second, and third year that we had from Cal Poly already, and another 25 students from around the country joined us in that first year. So we had 75 students, and we had all 4 years operating immediately, which was an advantage that normally you don't have, and the school was meant to be rather experimental, and I was curious to see what would happen if you didn't have a prescribed situation for students, and how would that develop differently from what we had done at Cal Poly and what most schools do and what was happening at SC and so forth. And it was an interesting experiment, and again, a lot to learn. So that is a little piece of that. Anyway, when I'm going to start with, I started in 1953, so my early work is what now is called mid-century. The early work was mid-century architecture, modern architecture. But most of us in the LA area were doing post and beam houses like this. USC was training students really to do the same kind of work. Cal Straub, who was really a leading professor here at USC at that time, was a great proponent of that, and he and I really, even though I went to Cal, I had some of the same sensibilities that he did, and so it wasn't so different. So here's a few examples of the early work that was over the first dozen years of my practice, and during that time I probably, I think I completed about 35 of these type of houses, along with maybe another 15 industrial and commercial buildings. So I'll run through these. I think I will anyway. Anyway, you can see again here is the care about keeping the trees and working around that. That's the same kind of shadow play that I was talking about. The actual character of the building is not so different from what you have seen in the case study houses, and but these are done and were made in wood. And primarily because most clients at that time really were not interested in steel houses. Only Pierre Koenig and Craig Elwood in this area were able to really get a few clients that were interested in steel. And I was more interested in getting the work up and to explore what was happening than I was to work in steel, even though I would have preferred in many ways to work that way. And again, we're talking about lifestyle and what it meant to be out and use the California, you know, indoor, outdoor play, and also you see here very early on the same set of sliding doors that Steve was referring to much later in his house. These are houses in the valley, and at that time nobody used air conditioning, and so architects really had to care about overhangs, trellising, ways of shading, and so forth that would keep the houses cool. And these houses that I did early on still don't have air conditioning, and the people are still quite comfortable in them. So there was that care about energy use and so forth early on, but it was mostly for comfort and so forth. This on the left is also a valley house in which, again, you see the amount of trellising. This is a screened-in terrace that was used. Again, they're all mostly post and beam houses. And this is a house on fairly steep hillside. It's all on piling. And I expressed the piling through the house with laminated beams, and looked like so. The apartments that you saw earlier, this is my first project actually, a lot of garden apartments like this that I did. And in this case, it was important to me to have the flexibility by having this unit of between the bedroom and the living room be flexible. They could be moved however you wanted to have it. These units all have their own very large patio. The first unit works over the garage. This upper unit has its patio over here. The one you see here on the upper side goes out, and these areas were almost as large as the apartment, or they were as large. And the ground floor had all of their individual spaces, so that was fairly typical of that. Some of the early commercial that we did was like so. Industrial buildings were like this, and these were all tilt-ups and precast concrete. And also I did some developer apartments at that time, and just to give you an idea, from 1964 to now, in those days, these were built for $9 a square foot. The industrial building that you saw just before, that was $4 a square foot. So the developers here said, well, we'll give you an extra 50 cents. You can get $9.50. You got a more difficult site, and maybe you can give us a more interesting building. And so in this case, the shape of the building really just follows the driveway that goes up there, and we had front and back patios and got quite a bit out of it, including a double height living room space, and quite a different building type than they did at that time, totally. It was about this time that I began, this is now about 12 years into my practice, and I just finished this apartment building with about 24 units, and I was to have the opportunity to build on this next site, and so I was thinking about how I would do it, because there were certain things I was dissatisfied in the building process. At the same time, we had done a land planning study for the city of Sierra Madre. My partners, my future partners and I at that time were doing advocacy work, and we had developed a publication on land planning in the hillside. Sierra Madre got word of it and wanted us to do this study for them. And in the process, they also asked us to make some models of how the houses would work on this hillside, different from the normal cut and pad. And most of the little houses that we did to show them were in model were bridge houses, not so dissimilar from my own. And so that was the point in time when I began to think about modular housing. And as you see, this is that unit, and I thought I was going to build next to it, and I thought about a system where I use the service tower as the connection with the laminated beams, the addition of the deck, I think I'm pointing to that, and the bedroom and living room modules. That project didn't go ahead. As you know, you probably will know someday, in architecture, there are periods where there's a lot of building, and like the last 4 or 5 years or more, periods where it's very slow. And about this time, the condo market dropped out, and so that developer didn't go ahead on the lot next door. Then I had the possibility of doing a couple hundred units for Sonoma State University. There were student housing units. And so again, I tried, we incorporated the same system for these, and actually the price was right. We still were in the $9 range. And, but then that developer decided not to go ahead. So then over the next years, almost 10 years, whenever it was appropriate, I used my custom-built houses to explore how you would break down, as I expressed before, how you would break down from modular, having a box-like module to where you could open it up. And so here were a series of, a smaller house, my own that you see here, same section you saw before. Another one that was more irregular with these shapes. Most of them, as was expressed earlier, were 8 by 12 by varying heights. And 8 by 12 was a plywood module that I used on all of these. And then this house is there, and then there was a 7,000 square foot house here. And I'll just run through what those look like. There's maybe a better blow-up of the, that you can see better of the modular system. So, one thing that besides the system itself is what I liked is that I could really maneuver around trees very well with it, and still I had a lot of bridging and long spans, so it worked well that way. This little house was the first kind of prototype, and what was interesting here was that the owner bought all of the lumber from a restaurant that was being taken down, which had laminated beams and a bunch of 2x4s or 2x6s and so forth lumber. And we incorporated all that lumber into this house, making it work with the same kind of my general system. This you've seen before is the support system for my house, and you saw enough of that in the film, but this was the larger house that using the same system. And the nice part about these is that when the soil conditions were not good, I could concentrate these supports that take all the seismic and all the vertical loads, and also touch down on a very minimum area of the land. The and you see the same kind of shadow play through the house, which I always find is pretty wonderful. In a later house, still using the same kind of system. One in North Carolina, still with the same system. And I was always interested in construction process, construction systems, and structure. Some people don't really care much about structure anymore, but I still find it an important element in architecture. And the process by which a building is made, I think, is very important. And I was one of the first people, I think, who incorporated in housing in LA the use of cranes. It's fairly typical in Europe, but it wasn't very typical here at all. This is a house that was it was a hybrid. All the beams and all laminated beams and all laminated posts were pre-cut, pre-drilled, and this was erected in one day by using cranes. So it was similar to a steel system in a way, where you can crane everything in, get it in place, then come back and infill later, tighten it up and so forth. So here you see the structure just on the right, and on the left you see it infilled with, these are laminated ceilings and laminated floors as well. And this was another system that I used in a Malibu house, in which we, all of these vents that you see here were fabricated on the ground, and then one day we picked them all up, as you see here with the crane, and then came back and did the infill that you see there. And that ended up like so. Another system that I was interested in doing was we had this land up in Beverly Glen, and we had hoped to do a little planned community out of it, but they wouldn't let us do it, so we had to stay with these very tight, small sites. And I used a repetitive system, three here, three there, and then added these components that could be used for both energy use, privacy, and sun insulation. I'll talk about sun insulation a little more later when I talk to energy issues. The system that you also saw somewhat before was this one where I took repetitive cubes that were varying in height, then broke open the corners because there were trees on this site that I wanted to pick up and see. And in this case, you have almost a reverse system from before, where the bathrooms and the kitchens are actually tacked on, and the structure is the panel system. And so this plan, it was just always the same plan shape. The same way here, I went 45 degrees and tied them together at the intersections, and that was done because I wanted to get the views into the canal area. This is down in Long Beach in the Naples area, and so I wanted the bedroom to be able to see to the front as well as the living area. So in this case, the carpenter built all of these panels, attached the beams and the joist hangers, and again we craned these up in a day, and then he infilled, and the house looked like so. And the one at the beach, at the canals, look like this. And I want you to look at the way I used a sunscreen system forward and a clear glass behind, and we were trying to protect the heat gain in this case. This was now in 1975. We're moving not too fast, but in 1975, California instituted its prescriptive code on energy. Title 24 is what it became. At that time, the prescription was that you could only have 20% floor area, glass area to floor area ratio. And most of my houses were more like 40, 60, and so they weren't even near what the prescriptive code stated. But I wasn't satisfied with that because I didn't really want to change my design attitude if I didn't really have to. And I'm one of these people who's sort of an empiricist. I really want to test things and find out how they really work. So I took 14 of my houses and 5 regular houses that would follow the prescriptive standard and compare them, and I used a whole series of evaluations that could be looked at, and I was trying to determine what was really the reason that some were more effective than others. And I found that all of my houses were more energy efficient than really these other 5 houses, which sort of surprised me. And what surprised me the most was that the most efficient of all was that last house that I showed you in Naples, because it had a lot of surface area, and it didn't seem like it would have been that efficient. But then I analyzed it, looking at the sunscreen that you see here, and so there was a heat trap, and you'd get less heat loss through that process. It kept the sun out in the summer, let it in the winter, and of course, by it being open through 3 stories, the heat would rise, and also come to the ceilings and radiate from there. And so then I thought, well, another way of, once you get the warm air up, you could also take it down to a rock storage, use that to add more heat to your heating system. If we had to cool, there was a stairway that went up to a roof deck, and that could be opened, door could be opened up and cooled out, and the same way here. So there were a lot of elements that I then began to think about as I went through the next period of my life, in which I thought of, how could I make houses more energy efficient? What were systems that I could use, both active and passive, and so forth. And so here's a series of houses that I worked on, and here you see again, it's the 45-degree turn in order for the solar collectors to get to the sun. There's a series of greenhouse elements that are out front. It's hard. Just a minute. And each one of these here, it's hard for me to really see it from here adequately. Anyway, in each of those little greenhouse elements, there was a process where they could be closed off. To get the mass, I used a water-filled fireplace unit. The owner wanted fireplaces in each of the rooms. And so by adding water, you get the mass. And I'm not on grade, so I didn't have concrete or any of the really that type of material that would give me the mass. And so that was the thinking behind this particular house. In this case, this was along near Malibu. It's a big rock, and the site was a rocky hillside. Oh, God. here. This is all rock. And so I went and thought about developing a greenhouse that would cover that whole area, and solar collectors at the top. What happens here is during the day, I don't know how much you know about energy of this type, maybe you know a lot by this time. It takes about 8 hours for the heat to build up and then to go back. You can use it then to help heat the house. And so the idea here was during the day you open this up, at night you close it, then you open your sliding doors along the corridor here and let that heat come in the evening. So that was a strategy used there. In this house, again, here I wanted to use a monitoring system of solar collectors. This is kind of an interesting project because the owner wanted, it's almost like two houses. They wanted this to be their main house, and then there was also a secondary unit up at the top, and so there was a stairway to them and a stairway to this one. In this case, it's a steel pile support system with laminated beams each side. And the idea was that, and I guess you can see it better here, the solar collectors would take their heat to this central piece in the pool area. This would have a fan coil system, then that would take the heat back to the house itself in a forced air system. It could also be a radiant system and then be dealt with differently. And of course, if the house wasn't heated, all that solar could go into the pool for pool heating. And this was a 45-degree slope. The strategy on this one, again, besides developing the trussing system and the structural system that held it up, was to also have a greenhouse element with water-filled containers at the bottom for mass. Again, at the end of the day, you let that go up into the house. The part that was based in the concrete at the back, that was also mass that could be generating heat. There was possibility to get rid of the overheating through a cooling system, solar collector along the back, and that was its system. And this one, again, it's on a site that spanned a little gully through it, and these were turned, rotated in order to get, again, the solar collection. The solar panels here were facing west. The north side would let the light in from the north as well. And in the west sun was heat trapped and then let into the room later on. And this is a concrete block house. In this case, the wall, this center wall is east-west, goes east to west. The object here was to have a series of solar panels along here. There was a roll-up, roll-down shade. This would roll up, this would roll down, and that way you could control the amount of sun coming in. Then you'd heat the concrete block wall, and then that would feed back 8 hours later. Here you see those screens here, the solar panels exposed here. The system, one of these takes the heat from the top back down to a rock storage like I expressed in that other shot, and this is the feed that feeds the heating system. Used, because it's a pretty vertical house, we used glass treads to take the light down through. the house totally. One at the beach, and in this, well, I'll go to the next one. In this case, this part of the house was rotated 15 degrees in order to have what originally was projected as a solar collector through the middle that would, at night, be able to be rotated into a closing position. The owners liked it without the solar collector, so I never got it in. And so that, even though we made these moves, it didn't eventually play. The house was built out of one portion was concrete and the other portion was a steel frame. And the concrete portion was supporting the pool at the roof. You know, there was a lot of talk about being a warm architect. The original idea was to really build the house this way, and the owner was the one who wanted to introduce the wood, and then the second owner wanted to take the wood off. So today the house looks like this, and so now it's not such a warm house in some people's opinion. Another one was designed as a solar collector all along this whole distance. A few, again, greenhouse areas for heating. This house didn't go ahead at that time. Later it was built like so, and by that time most people were no longer interested in my solar ideas because they weren't getting the rebate, and so this didn't occur. Now, all of these houses could be talked to the same way as my house was talked to in that in the film, and I usually don't talk about those elements in the same way. I'm always more interested in the process and the construction methods than I am in that discussion, although they're all near and dear to me as far as all the things I was talking about earlier, shadows and so forth. And finally, this house was a 15,000 square foot house that somebody came to me to do, and of course at the time he came, this guy had all the money in the world, and he liked I gave him a presentation of my thinking process, and he wanted to incorporate as much as possible into this whole thing, and it was, excuse me, first of all, most of the house is right here. There's the living and master bedroom and so forth, and a garden around totally. So there's a circular enclosed space and then just a square enclosed space. And that way, again, it was for the heating elements. This was, for retaining the water and so forth, and we had a pool inside the house. The level of the street and the level of the roof were the same, so there was a bridge all the way through to the upper portion. There was a height limit, but I used a hydraulic system to lift the entry at that point in time, so you could enter from the top and then go on down, or you could drop down and come in the normal way. We incorporated a bunch of ideas. One was the bed could slide out from the master bedroom. Had a fireplace that would be lifted from the living room up so that you could view it from the master bedroom. I had to stay back 50 feet from the toe of the top of the slope going down to the water. So in order to see white water, I had this telescoping piece that would go out for people to walk out on. There was another one from the lower area where they could walk through this. So this had a lot of kind of fun ideas, but the guy, he ran, for some reason, all of a sudden he didn't have any money, and that was the end of the project. Again, just to show that not everything is wood and not everything that I've done is warm. This is a concrete and steel house. I usually work, you solve the problem related to the particular situation, the client's wishes. In this case, there was an existing house, an existing concrete retaining wall. He enjoyed concrete and steel, and so that was what I ended up doing for him. And it's a combination of a steel rigid frame and a series of concrete walls. These are just a couple more modular houses. This is one at the beach, one in the desert. Commercial building that we put up by modulars up in Northern California. There's a concrete house that I was doing that for Topanga area where there's fire potential, so it's an all-concrete house. And then a couple of larger projects was this faculty office building for San Bernardino State University. And in this case, they have 80-mile-an-hour winds coming from this direction. And so this was designed to take those winds over into the other side. I came over here to work with Pierre Koenig on this because you guys had a wind machine here, and he said it works perfectly. So I was happy to hear that. And then also incorporating some water for cooling because it's out in the valley type area. Gymnasium for Loyola Marymount. It was a cable catenary structure. Actually, I worked with Gert Shirley. I don't know if Gert's is still here. I guess he is. In developing this, and of course it was a 280-foot span, and this seemed to be the most economical way to do it. And in this case, I'm using a wind scoop at this point to bring in cool ocean breezes. That was one of the points to hold down the system on the other side. We had these handball courts to do that. Large truss through this portion with airplane doors to open it up to cool it at halftime. This was the existing gym. This was the new one. We connected them with solar collectors to heat the pool. And so using the same kind of mentality about energy in larger projects. Santa Monica Bus Administration Building. Again, the idea was to use these for air scoops. I'll show you the diagram in a minute. And we tried to give it an analogy of bus and bus ideas, and the idea that it was a freeway building. These are panels on the west side for protection, solar panels up above. So as we look at it here, for daylighting, I use these horizontal panels that would bring daylighting in from the south side. I also had north daylighting. The panels were established for seating view and standing view. The air scooping was from this point to the plenum so that you could control the way that air came into the building. Solar collectors over an outdoor patio, and these areas of sun control. And at night, we actually wanted the last sun to come into this area because these people, the bus guys, used this at night for, I guess they had pool tables and various kinds of activity up there. So it was kind of a 24-hour building that we did. Well, the reason we had that building, and I'm just about through now, was that in the early 60s, when Calvin Hamilton became the planning director for the city of Los Angeles, I was asked to do a transportation study and a communication study for the city of LA. At that time, LA the freeway system was supposed to be on a 4-mile grid in both directions. And so, along with other things, I thought, well, this seemed to be a good sort of quadrant for planning and development, because we were trying to determine whether it should be centers or corridors or what it should be. And so in this case, 4 miles square is about like the city of Santa Monica, which I think is a good city. And in these cases, they would then break down into 1 mile quads, and in that you would have your elementary school, you'd have your low-rise buildings, your single-family homes towards the freeway. Then in each case you would have your more dense housing, and then at the hubs you would have the most dense, depending upon what these neighborhoods had, where the high schools happened. If they had high schools, fine. If they needed new ones with development, they would be in these areas. Anyway, the idea was to think about the freeway, not fixed rail, as a system for developing LA. And then instead of the fixed rail, I designed these individual transit units, because I always felt that LA, the fixed rail would never really work in the long run, and that if we had little electric cars that were more like 3 feet wide by 8 feet, or about, a quarter of the size of a regular car, and would be 1 passenger wide with a secondary passenger in the back, that with these kinds of vehicles running through the neighborhood, you could then only have vehicles that you could come out to, which would only be 1 lane wide, or just a parking lane wide, about 6 feet, and you would have all this land left for children's play and other things that could go on, and these could be taken onto the freeway. Some variations on this. The idea was to be computer controlled, electric. They'd drive eventually by themselves. Okay, so this is 1960s. Of course, that wasn't adopted in any way. But if you really look down the line, and I won't be around, but I imagine with all what's going on, you hear about these smart cars that can drive by themselves, which they're working on. They've been working on them forever. When I went to the World's Fair as a 12-year-old in 1939, they already had systems, GM did, in their exhibit, in which they could radar control cars already. So a lot of this doesn't happen for various reasons, political and otherwise, and economic. But I still think that eventually LA is not going to be able to make it with their fixed rail, and they're going to have to possibly begin to think about other methods of getting more vehicles on this way. You can get 10 times the quantity of vehicle through this kind of a process. And if we really forgot about the car at every house, and you could get into a system like this, which really still gave you the vehicle, but it would be a public vehicle. I know it's socialistic in some people's minds, but it would, I think, relieve a lot of the problems that we have. And I had a whole series of planning attitudes with that. And our firm also did the downtown people mover system, which was a fixed rail, because that's what they finally determined what they were going to do. And this was the routing of that system, which is about the same as the subway system now that's there. We had these intercepts where the cars would park at this point. You'd either pick up the fixed rail or a bus or whatever vehicle. We were keeping the cars out of the city. These were some drawings of what it would look like in the city at Arco Towers and at City Hall. And at this point you see bridging from City Hall into what is now Grand Park. And in the 60s, we had projected this for the city, which was really Grand Park, in which from the music center, there was a bridge over into this area. This was a high-intensity used area for entertainment and so forth, too, which I think they're thinking of doing as well. So quite often it takes 40, 50 years before anything happens that you sometimes think of earlier. And finally, we did have the opportunity to do a small new town outside of Los Angeles. And at that time, of course, around London, in Britain, there were a lot of new towns being developed, and also in Sweden, Finland, and so forth. And megastructure was not uncommon. So this was a projection that we made for this town outside of LA. And so the intense, heavier, multiple dwellings were up in this area. This was a lower density area. This was the center of the whole process. We had our own reservoir, and these were some drawings that I made to show what it might look like. It was a prefabricated triangular panel that we were going to use, and so forth. So that, thank you for your patience, and that sort of ends 60 years of Ray Kappe. And if anybody has any questions. Yes.
Well, when I look back at that, I look, for example, at the gymnasium that you worked on with Pitts, Dr. Catenary Arch.
Yeah.
You had flow-through ventilation that you set up and used as weights to hold the catenary down. You had solar collectors. You had all of the stuff that I love, and yet it wasn't about that stuff. It was just a clean, beautiful design. Well, where does that stuff disappear to then?
Where does it disappear to? Well, I don't know. Another thing I was going to say earlier, when we did that first prefab, that was the first platinum house in the country. That was only 6 years ago. Today, there's hardly a project that's done, whether it's private or public almost, that isn't getting some lead, whether it's silver, gold, or platinum. And so what I think architects have always wanted to engage that process. What we found, like I was doing it in the 70s, it was difficult to get clients to go along with all of that, because each of those items does have a price tag on it. And I was trying to single glaze all of those buildings instead of dual glazing, so I was coming up with all these other systems. Well, if they had a price tag of $50,000, the owner knew that. Today, most of us use dual glazing and other processes, and the owner doesn't that's part of their glazing bid, so they don't even think twice about the fact that that's a cost as well. But all I'm saying to you is I think everybody's working on a lot of this today. I see much more of that. I see much more of many things that we never thought would happen. Particularly globally, I mean, there's, so much of these things going on in China and other places where they really architects get an opportunity to do so much, and so many get these prime jobs like museums and theaters, auditoriums, philharmonics and so forth. And I think most students think about that's what they would like to do. It's not so easy. I mean, any of you are architects, it's pretty hard to get those jobs unless you're now, huge. The competition that's out there, other than for the architects, is amazing. I mean, you get guys like, I'm going all over the place here, but firms like AECOM and the Genslers and all of this, which is great, but it's very hard to compete against any of them. I mean, because they've eaten up all these firms that provide these various kinds of buildings, and so smaller firms try to go after that, and it's very, very, very hard, I think. But I think a lot of it is being done. I mean, when I was doing it, it was not much at all. And in fact, even the planning, the things that we did in our firm, we were the only small firm really involved with that. And when I became involved in education, part of the reason was I didn't want to see another generation grow up who didn't really care about these issues. And so, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I come from another generation, several generations back to these young people today, and their opportunities are different, and I think they will go into a completely different world than I came into when we were doing, small post and beam houses and that kind of development that took place. So I don't know. It's really hard to say, but I see a lot more of what you're talking about.
Ray, can you talk a little bit after practicing for 60 years actively, what your sources of inspiration were and have been, and maybe are now, maybe how they've shifted?
Well, I don't know. I mean, everybody always asks me that, and when you saw the film right away, they said, well, what were your inspirations? Well, everybody who was my predecessor that's one form of inspiration. I mean, we had a lot of master architects in those days, and those were, I didn't say I was going to make, this is a Mies building, this is going to be a Wright building. I didn't work like that. So I always consider myself really just a problem solver, and I don't know, it's hard to describe your intuitive aspect of what you do. It's easier to talk about the rational part. What comes out intuitively is really within who you are, I think. But I don't know. You can see. I mean, you can judge for yourself what you see in those and where it came from. But I didn't consciously say, one thing or another. And even when
Nature seems to be an overriding influence.
Well, site, number one, site, program, environmental control systems, structure. I mean, I think architecture has to be all of those things, and I think when it becomes just form, and then you don't know how you're even holding it up, I really start to wonder. But the computer gives the student today that opportunity to be much more form-oriented. But I think it misses. It's exciting in some ways. I mean, when I go look at the drawings that are done today, computer drawings, and the kinds of things that students project, I think it's quite exciting. But I don't think it's very well understood. And of course, with us, my generation, who kind of developed by baby steps, by comparison, you really learned how to, put buildings together, understand relationships of space and rooms and so forth and so on. So it's different, but when you can make all these beautiful curving things, it's enticing, and I don't know how that plays. And that question is asked of me all the time. What do you think about what's going on today? And how to? But I think it's okay. Except I think one needs the basic roots understanding first, and then I think then you explore. And I know at SARC where they start with the computer so early, and with some of the software that they have that generates great things. I don't know if I think it leaves a void in there somewhere. I don't know if SC is the same. I used to come over here to teach at SC periodically because I used to like their topic studios. The topic studios here always dealt with urban issues and ideas that SARC students didn't even want to talk about. So that was interesting to me, and I don't know today exactly where it is, because every 5 years there's some change, and who knows what 5 years you're going through, and who's here and what's going on. So it's not an answer to your question, but I have never thought about who inspires me or doesn't inspire me, because I've always thought of it more as a language that you learn. In other words, if you look at what Frank Lloyd Wright does, you understand his language. You know, what is he doing? If you look at Alto, what's his language? It's another language. What's Lucan's language? It's another language.
Alberto taught a class at school like that.
Yeah, well, he had them do studies of each one, although I always felt that the students came up short in those classes. I never felt that they quite understood it, other than, in total. But, but that's a language class. Today, I don't think people would do the same thing. I think the software drives so much of what one does, and I think in the future, as software changes, that'll continue to drive what the student does. But, why should they necessarily go back to 1950? They may have to do it when they get out into the real world, that they'll find that they can't do. And that computer doesn't do much for them other than CAD drawings. But, it's not the same. How many of the students here are going to get these prime projects? How many students at any school get those prime projects? How many architects in here get those projects? Most of us are doing houses and housing and small commercial, and maybe, you don't even do either you do high rises, you do sports facilities, you do, those are all now specialties, right, for certain people. So I think as a student, as a young person, if that's your goal, then you have to determine in your mind early that you probably should be going to work for a larger firm to get your foot in the door, to be able to understand that level and how you would later be able to get the client that might let you do one of those things. But it's not easy. Architecture is multifaceted. You have to market. You have today, which is unbelievable compared to my day. We never marketed. It just was a different time. There weren't RFPs and RFQs and all this stuff. Anyway, I think I kept you much too long. So.
I think we should give you a rest.